Thanks for downloading the Marcus Pye podcast.
Welcome to the Marcus Pye podcast on historicracingnews.com. This episode brought to you by whattire.com. I'm joined today in the studio by Paul Tarsi, and I should really say bonjour, Paul.
Bonjour indeed. I mean, you've been spouting various bits of French most of the day, I think, Marcus, since your weekend. It sounded great.
Very much so. It was a lovely invitation to be called down to Paris by the FIA to be the MC, the compere, for their historic championship prize giving for 2019. And it was just a splendid occasion. We had competitors from 16 nations win awards for their daring do in rally cars, in race cars, and also in hill climbing. And some of those guys are seriously bonkers. But no, very interesting. And it was all held in the Pavillon Gabriel, just a stone's throw from the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile headquarters in the Place de la Concorde in Paris.
See, I told you you'd be speaking French all this time.
Yeah, I wish my schoolmaster could hear me now. It's been a long time.
But it sounds as if it was an absolute blast.
Yes, very much so. I wasn't really sure what to expect. I've never been before. And the invitation came through Louis Quignou, who's in charge of the Historic Technical Passport department these days. And it was lovely to meet up with some old friends from the FIA, Vincent Caro, who I first met when he was involved with the karting commission plenty of years ago. We went up to PF International to watch one of the first big meetings up there, and Mariam Bettinelli, who put much of the event on, the Duchess of Cambridge lookalike, I have to say.
Let's not go the royal family route just at the moment.
Well, but no, very interesting, and I think that the passion for historic sport in that room was unparalleled. When you're out at race meetings, of course, you tend to see the guys and girls who are desperate to win everything, gunning for it. But on this occasion, it was the end of a lovely season in different disciplines, and with competitors from all across Europe gathering together in a glitzy venue. Some super silverware on offer, and some of the really big names from the FIA, Graham Stoker, Paolo Cantarella, they were there. Emanuele Pirro came, 5-time Le Mans winner, and he stepped into the breach as an award presenter. And you don't need too much encouragement to get Emanuele going. He's absolutely locked into historic racing these days. He loves it. And, of course, I recall him from his Formula 3000 days when I was reporting the European Championship at the back end of the 80s. He was racing kind of his frontline career, trying to get to Formula 1.
I've always thought that with Emanuele Pirro, he was probably born 25 years too late.
I'm sure you're right. I mean, I don't think he'd want to be sort of 80 or something now, but at the end of the day, he's happy being where he is. Yeah. He's very comfortable in his own skin, and he ended up making a fantastic professional career in sports car racing, and he's able to indulge his love of historic racing, coming to events like Goodwood, to the members' meeting, to the revival, and he always puts on a just amazing performance. And he is so wonderfully engaged with the fans, whether they are people who know about his previous racing career or whether they're just there to see what's happening that weekend. I mean, he's very generous with his time. He's a lovely guy, and I hope very much that we can get him into interview mode around the Goodwood meetings this year.
That would be nice. That would be really good. But tell me, with the ceremony that you did at the weekend, is it owners of cars? Is it preparers of cars? Is it the whole paraphernalia, or is it just the exclusive, rarefied atmosphere?
These principally are owner drivers. And some of the racers, of course, have their cars professionally prepared. Some of the rally drivers probably have their cars professionally prepared. But at the end of the day, a lot of them do their own work on the cars, and you can see they are just so knowledgeable about their special vehicles. And when you see some of the rally people absolutely at max attack in a Porsche 911 or the usual sort of gamut of cars, Lancia Delta Integrales, doing their stuff. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a guy in a little Toyota Starlet, which he's obviously had for about 100 years and escaped either the crusher or the lure of short oval hot rod racing in Britain. And they're all driven with great aplomb, great heart, and the most successful competitors clearly do things very, very well indeed.
It always surprises me when you see videos of the Tour Auto, where people are driving things on everyday roads, which are priceless cars, and driving them like absolute lunatics.
That's right. They probably bought them at a time when they bought them right.
Yeah.
And say, we've said before, sort of like the guy who bought an ERA in 1958 for £250 or something like that. It's still a £250 ERA, despite the fact it's probably worth £500,000.
Yeah.
And much the same. A lot of these people have had the cars for a lot of time. They've probably added value to them over the years by having them, more and more prepared for these events. But they're obviously pretty well heeled, most of these people, but they're running at events throughout Europe, and in the rallies I think there was something like 9 events or something like that all across Europe, and it was just brilliant. And it's not just club drivers who do it. In one of the rally categories, the winners were really, really well known people, and Fabrizio Pons, who was the champion co-driver in category 4 with a guy called Lucky, who I think his name is Luigi Battistoli, but they were in a Lancia Delta Integrale.
Lucky in exclamation mark.
Indeed.
Wow.
The pseudonymous Lucky. They managed to roll the Lancia Delta Integrale at one point during the season, but they still won the championship, which is amazing. But Fabrizia Pons is a serious international rally driver. She won 5 World Championship rounds as a co-driver, 4 with Michel Mouton in the Audi Quattros in 1981 and 82. And Michel Mouton, well known to those of us who have been involved with the Goodwood Festival of Speed from the beginning.
Yeah.
I've got a great story about Michel Mouton on that in a second. But yes, Fabrizio Pons also won the Monte Carlo Rally in 97 with Piero Liatti and a Subaru Impreza WRC. So much history there. The Mouton story is funny because you recall, obviously, the short Quattros, what I used to describe as the Land Rover with a lovely engine noise and a slightly aerodynamic body. Amazing things. And Michel was at the on one of the press days in the early days of the festival. There was a midweek press day about a month before. And it was always, might have been 3 or 4 months before, actually, when they were setting the scene. Lord March, as he was then, would invite a few customers down, and a few competitors would be invited to bring cars to show them off. And in fact, some of those early press days, there were actually more competitors there than there were at the first Festival of Speed in '93.
Wow.
It was amazing. Anyway, Michel Mouton was sitting there on the start line in the 5-cylinder short Quattro, Audi Sport Quattro, with them making that deliciously kind of offbeat 5-cylinder turbocharged noise, and probably about 700 GGs under the bonnet.
Yeah.
And the marshal looked in and said, "I'm afraid you can't go up the hill. You and your passengers don't have crash helmets, etc." And there was a and "Watch me," she said. Off she went.
Did she? Did she? I think a lady with spirit, undoubtedly.
Absolutely.
Well, she put together the whole Race of Champions thing.
Very much so. Yeah. And it's still to be seen at some of the big internationals, I understand. And still, of course, has immense celebrity status, kind of 40 years after her kind of heyday as a world rally driver for Audi.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And those Quattros really are special.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's the noise more than anything else. That if I'm entirely honest, rally cars tend to pass me by quite a bit. But to hear a Quattro with, as you say, that really strange noise is.
But the point of the rally car, of
fabulous.
course, you only tend to see it once on a stage. If you're sort of snoozing or looking the other way or doing whatever at a racetrack, they'll be round again in a minute and a half.
You must have spent the whole of the weekend or whole of the ceremony just sort of people spotting and looking at who was there.
It was interesting because a lot of the rally drivers I'm actually not familiar with, and I wouldn't begin to say that I was. But when you have an amazing team of Finnish drivers, the Historic Rally Club Finland, who have won the team trophy for the season by a single point. There were 3 teams in there at the end of this contest, and the Finns won it from Rodendri Historic Rally of Italy by a point, and 4 points behind them were the Flexifly Rally team from Britain with their cars. But it was absolutely superb. One of the Finnish guys, Timo Tuominen, was celebrating 50 years of international rallying. Absolutely unbelievable. And he was co-driver in Category 1 in a 2002 Ti BMW with Elias Kivetila. The Finns were a splendid bunch. They were really enjoying their
I should think a
evening.
night out with the Finns. Yeah, nothing gets more dangerous.
But it was very, very good, and there's some very good Brits in there as well. A husband and wife team, Ernie and Karen Graham, with an Escort twin cam. They were second in that division, won by a Porsche crew, as so many of these things are. And there's some beautiful 911s in that. But the rally side was very, very interesting. And I was chatting to a couple of the top guys sort of behind historic racing and rallying in Finland, and with a fair wind, they're in their 50th anniversary of sort of historic sort of racing and stuff this year. There's a chance I could go up there in the summer and have a look for myself. I really want to go to the great track they have, Hämeenlinna Arvonisto, with its switchback kind of thing. You mentioned earlier on, like a scale trick track,
Yeah.
and it's just like that.
Is it really?
And
didn't
and it's
know that.
pretty much unchanged since the 1960s. The hill climbing is something that takes me back to my roots as well, because I used to go to events at Great Auckland near Reading, really fantastic little venue in the 60s and 70s. It closed in 74. Also quite a lot to Prescott and to Shelsley Walsh, been going since 1905 on the same course, same 1,000 yards. And the European hill climbs are just incredible. I never went to Ollonvilla in Switzerland, where a lot of the Formula One drivers would turn up. Jim Clark would turn up in an Indy car or a Formula One car or whatever Colin Chapman had available, and a lot of the guys did those. But I did go to Saint-Saëns-les-Rongiers in Switzerland, the really, really famous Swiss climb in 1980, and I went with. There were a couple of British competitors, David Franklin, who was the 1978 British Hill Climb and Sprint Championship. He had a March 772 when he won the championship, and a 782 after that, the all-time classic March Formula 2 car. He was competing, and Paul Edwards was there as well with a big March, and he was a friend. So we travelled out in their motorhome and just sort of tooled around, went to the depths of Switzerland to this climb that, of course, you climb for a couple of minutes. It's not sort of 30 seconds and it's all over. But it was just magnificent. And even back then, you'd see Porsche 935s and all sorts of other stuff going. But the historic hill climbs, which are very special, and again, it's run over a bunch of different events over a season. It's over 9 rounds. Is fantastic. And there's a Czech guy who's one of the big FIA powers in historic hill climbing, Stan Minarek, who sort of kind of oversees a lot of this stuff. And they travel all around Europe. And it's very, very serious stuff. But again, you don't have to have something that is a specialised hill climb car. You don't have to have an Azella BMW sports racer or whatever to go out there and win your category. It's all in different categories, so everyone has a good chance. And there was a chap from Austria who won the category 1, driving a 650cc Steyr-Puch, like a Fiat 500 with a hotted up engine. And well, we saw the video of him coming up one of these climbs, and it was staggering. He was ragging this thing beyond belief, and the engine was screaming, and it just sat there. I mean, you know full well that if you lift off the throttle for a nanosecond, you probably cost yourself 10 seconds over the climb, and he was totally committed. But it was brilliant, and you move from category 1 to category 2, and suddenly you're into Porsche Carrera RSRs, Di Tommaso Pantera, and Giulio Palmieri, who won that division. He drove both during the season. Sort of, maybe he thought that the Pantera was better on some hills and the Porsche better on others, depending on kind of what traction you needed, really.
And I have to think about what jumper I'm going to wear which particular day.
Decisions, Paul. But you've got the logo on your shirt, so you're okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Corporate through and through, you know me.
In category 3, another very interesting car was there, and this guy, Jiri Kubicek, who is from the Czech Republic, has won this category 4 times in 5 years with the Skoda 130 RS. A lovely little Skoda coupe, which again he prepares and drives beautifully. And I think back to the days when the Works Skoda team used to compete on what they used to call the Peace and Friendship Cup circuit racing series. And of course we used to see John Hogland, the great Norwegian rally driver, come over here and win his class nearly every year in a Skoda, whatever it was, 1000 MB or 1100 MB or something like that back in the day. But I joked at the thing, I think I remember the first Skoda coupe I paid any attention to was the one in which John Turner built with a 5-litre Chevrolet V8 in the back, soon to be replaced with an 8.1 big block when Arthur Collier had it. And Arthur's still involved with Motorsport Ireland, whose president, John Naylor, was at the awards ceremony.
Isn't that a great circle?
It is just brilliant. And also into the proper racing cars. We talked about the Ozellas made in Turin by Enzo Ozella. They got as far as Formula One, poor end of the pit lane stuff. But the sports cars from Ozella were always fantastic. And Uberto Bonucci was the dominant force in that this year with this kind of Formula 2 BMW engine screaming away in a little sports car. And you actually saw one piece of the film where he caught one of the smaller cars on the climb. So who said there wasn't overtaking in hill climb?
Really?
You did need mirrors, perhaps, particularly if in sort of an Auto Bianchi A112 or something and being caught at a chicane by someone coming up quite a chunk quicker.
Yeah.
But that was interesting, and there's all the single-seater stuff as well. That was won by a Czech guy, Andrej Chitl, with a Metalex MTX 103.
What's a Metalex?
It's a locally built single-seater, of which a lot were made. Metalex made a lot of cars,
really?
MTXs, single-seaters.
Never heard of them.
And they had Skoda engines, and I think some had sort of Lauda engines and bits and pieces in them. But again, it does what it says on the tin. If you've got 20 Metalexes out there, MTXs, then you race against each other. Whoever's best wins the championship.
Yeah, fair enough.
But so that was the hill climbing side of it. That was interesting. Of course, the circuit racing stuff is of particular kind of interest to us. You love your racing, I love my racing. And the FIA Lurani Trophy for Formula Junior cars, historic Formula Junior cars, has been going now for 25 years. So that was a real landmark for the series. And Duncan and Maya Rabaliati, who run it brilliantly from Wimbledon, with their daughter Sarah Mitrike, who's based in Lithuania. She does a lot of the work from out there. And they've put on a great show for so many years. And this year, again, it was a really close fought championship, and the winner was Bruno Weibel from Switzerland for the third time in a Lotus 22. But he only wins in odd numbered years, 15, 17 and 19. So everyone else has a bit of a chance maybe next year if history sort of holds anything on that one. But it's the depth of interest, the number of classes there. We had class winners from Britain, Germany, Sweden, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and Italy within that group, and then the Swiss overall champion. And I was chatting to Jim Timms, who I remember from Monoposto Club racing a long time ago. Monoposto Club started back in 1958. I think Jim's been doing it probably for about half its history. Well, Jim is 84, and he competes in a Cooper T59, which
Really?
is brilliant. He started competing on motorcycles, so he's got a screw loose really. But,
Yeah, yeah.
but he's
84?
84 years old, and he looks about 65, which is
Yeah. That is
extremely
incredible.
extremely annoying.
Yeah.
But no, it was good, and there's lots of veterans in there. One of the interesting cars that won its class this year was a car called the Rayberg, which you may not have heard of.
No.
It was made by a chap called Tammy Aberg. I keep his Sten really. I used to call him Tammy. He worked for Connaught's in Send on the A3 at one point. And Tammy Aberg built a car that was sort of based on a kind of a Cooper 500, if you like, and it's got this magnificent rolled aluminium body. It's stunning, and it couldn't be more diametrically opposed to the only car I ever saw Tammy Aberg compete in. You could laugh at this. It was the Farley Wallop hill climb autocross.
Farley
Wallop autocross.
That has to be in Somerset.
No, it's in Hampshire. It's not far outside Basingstoke. And
Really?
I used to help a bloke local to me who was the local absolute ace in Cooper races, a guy called Owen Coffey. He's gone now. And I used to spend a lot of time up at his garage, sort of passing spanners and generally interfering, playing Skelet's Trick on a Saturday evening, etc. And they had 3 minis in that, working out of that garage. And I went up to the Farley Wallop autocross with Owen. And Tammy Aberg was there bear in mind his Formula Junior car was beautiful, the scabbiest Jaguar XK140 you have ever seen. I'm sure it had more rust on it than proper metal, but by golly, was it quick.
And he was autocrossing.
And he was bouncing around this field at Farley Wallop in this Jaguar, kind of pretty much in his dotage then probably.
Yeah.
But amazing.
But isn't that incredible that there are so many things in that story which just do not fit.
Yes.
2020.
Exactly.
Autocrossing, it's not the same as it used to be, which was very basic. And
it's kind of nearest now to what they call grass track racing.
Yeah.
Although grass track racing, sort of, its upper echelons are space frame cars with 2 motorcycle engines in the back.
Yeah, and it's, I suppose it's like anything else, isn't it? That when you're talking about that, it was very simple, and as you say, you turned up with probably your MOT failure Jaguar XK120.
Well, my buddy used to tow his autocross Mini on the back of a similarly liveried road-going Cooper S. BMX 788A it was. I remember going testing with him once. He'd done something to the engine or the gearbox or whatever. And we drove out of Basingstoke to a farmer's field, and he'd spoken to the farmer. The farmer didn't mind, so he hooned around the field a couple of laps. It all worked, and put it back on the trailer and took it to the next event. But just fantastic fun.
Yeah.
But so that goes back. We go back to our Formula Junior, and at the end of it, the top 3 were really, really close. And it was in third place was an Italian guy, Daniele Saladini, with a Taraschi from Teramo. And that was interesting. Crispian Besley, who I recall seeing racing in Formula Ford cars back in I suppose it must have been the very late 70s or early 80s, and I reminded him of his sponsorship deal with Nina Ricci They might have gone on to greater things
moved on.
in racing than a British privateer in a Formula Ford. But he has a lovely Cooper T56 and with the BMC engine, and he won his class after a really good battle of the season, and has a Formula 2 Surtees as well in his stable, which is for sale. And then Bruno Weibel narrowly won it with his car, but he was really hard pushed in that Lotus by Mark Shaw, who raced in Formula 3000, and then sort of years later thought, I'd like to do this again. Went back to historic Formula Ford, and very soon ends up with a Formula Junior car, and he's loving all that.
It's funny, isn't it, how quite a lot of people who have raced either at a very professional level or less so as a competent amateur, but they've gone up through the ranks, but then on a return they'll come back, as you say, Formula Junior, Formula Ford.
They're the people who I find fascinating, because guys who have really made it in racing, they don't need to prove anything, but you do wonder at the end of it, I remember Keke Rosberg saying we offered him the opportunity to come. Simon Hadfield and I had his Formula 2 Chevron B40, the 1977 Enna Pergusa winner. And we said to the organisers at Goodwood, if Keke would like to come and be reunited with his car, which was magnificently prepared, exactly as it was, looked the same, had an original engine in it, all of it was done beautifully. And I think Keke's sort of response at the time was sort of, well, those sort of cars weren't very safe when I was racing them when they were new, and I don't think that sort of 40 years would have done them any great favours. You don't have to drive it fast, Keke. Well, no.
Yeah,
yes. Of course he'd drive it fast.
And
we'd have been disappointed had he not.
Let's just look at that sentence as being something which is useful, that you don't have to drive it fast, Keke.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely brilliant. But no, the guys who come back, having probably not got there, and love it, just like Emmanuel Pirot, who did get there,
yes,
and comes back to enjoy racing because he just loves driving, and that for me is one of the great things of this whole sport. It's such a diverse sport. There's something for everybody, whether you're into sporting trials or you're into circuit racing. And I say we had winners from 16 nations at this awards ceremony, which really showed the breadth of the fraternity and that spirit and passion. We come back to those terms in which they're conducted. So it was very, very good.
Finding the right tyres for the right conditions is important. WhatTyre.com will help you find the right tyres for your car, whatever that may be. So if your tyres are underperforming or in need of replacing, get free, impartial and independent advice with WhatTyre.com. WhatTyre.com. Find the best tyres for you.
Thruxton Motorsport Centre, home to premium driving experiences, where 4 laps in a supercar or single-seater racing car means nearly 10 miles at speeds of over 100 miles an hour around Britain's fastest motor racing circuit. It's an experience that few others can offer. You can even have a 140 mile an hour passenger ride in a BMW M4. Thruxton Motorsport Centre, home to premium driving experiences.
Visit thruxtonracing.co.uk to book your premium driving experience.
I look forward to seeing you here.
Well, we're back then just to wrap up on the FIA Historic Championship prize givings in Paris over the weekend. And just a couple of more modern classes to deal with, Paul. The Historic Formula 3 European Cup, which is a one-off event held at Zandvoort for the last 2 years. It's really great fun. It's a circuit with great history going back to the 1940s. Now, of course, being partially dug up to modify it with this sort of banked last corner for the return of Grand Prix racing in 2020.
What do you think of that?
Not sure.
No.
I just hope it doesn't muck it up for the historic racing in September.
Well, yeah, there's that as well. And Is it a gimmick? Is it something?
I think what they've got to do, the Dutch are very proactive. They're trying to seize the opportunity. They've got this extraordinarily swell of support for their local hero, Max Verstappen. And if it doesn't happen when he's at the top of his game, then of course it's not going to. And at that point, they can draw in commercial partners and make it happen. But like all these things, how long do any of these races last? You always hear even some of the most established Formula One championship races are kind of in jeopardy in the longer term.
You think of when Fernando Alonso was absolutely in his pomp, and they had the two races in Spain, including the Valencia track, which I thought was lovely, but that's gone now because quite clearly people aren't quite as interested as they were because they haven't got Fernando at the front. I mean, whether they're going to have Carlos Sainz at the front is another thing entirely. But it would be a real shame for me if we saw Zandvoort be gimmickized. Is that a word?
I guess is now.
Just for the Verstappen factor, and then for it to fall into disrepute in 3, 4, 5 years' time.
Well, it's always the danger, isn't it? Because things move on, and the costs of putting these things on become absolutely astronomical. But nonetheless, the historic Grand Prix event at Zandvoort is absolutely fabulous. It's been going for 6 or 7 years now, and it's back early September. Week before Goodwood, and actually looking forward to that. And the Formula 3 will happen again there this time. It gives the champion of Category 2, the overall winner the last 2 years, a chance to go for a hat-trick if he wishes. And that's Christian Olsen, who's a lovely young lad. He's Danish, but he's based in London. And he's working with Andy Priaulx and John Pratt at iZone to hone his skills as a race driver. He's been racing in the ELMS, and he's actually going to do a deal now to move from historic Formula 3 into real-time Formula 3 this year. He's got 2 contracts on the table. He's in the happy position of being able to choose which he wants to go with, so that'll be good. But his historic car is a Martini Alfa Romeo. It's run by Slim Borgard, the Swedish former ABBA drummer, and kind of cameo role player in Formula One with ATS and Tyrrell, and he was on fantastic form at the weekend. We spoke to him earlier in the year, Nick and I, up at the Silverstone Classic, and he's a fascinating guy. And we'll at one point we'll get together with him and we'll record an interview, because some of the things from those days when he came up through Formula Ford and Formula 3 into Formula One, you just wouldn't believe.
I'm sure.
You make your Formula One debut having done 8 laps in the car somewhere else the previous week.
Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it?
It doesn't.
I think one of the other things, just to mention it, Marcus, is that if anybody who's listening to this has a particular favourite that they'd like us to try and get onto the podcast, then they can email us at podcast@historicracingnews.com, and we'll see what we can do, because if anybody's got a particular favourite, let us know.
Well, I'm sure that the stars will align somewhere, because you and I are both sufficiently long in the tooth to have come across very, very many people in racing over the years, and it would be great to hook them in, which would be very, very good. Formula 3 also, we had a British driver doing really well, Keith White, twice HSCC champion with his Ralt, and it's always great to see newcomers to historic sport do well, and Gianluigi Candiani falls into that category, Italian with a March Toyota. But in the earlier category, the winner was Valerio Leone, who's a tremendous character, had a bicycle business which he sold, and now based in Monaco, and campaigns the XTO Fabi March 783 with great aplomb. You'll remember from several years ago, there was an enormous bang in the Monaco historic Formula 3 race when a very slow back marker waddled into Valerio's path, and there proceeded to be what they call a sacrochage, and cars flew into barriers and knocked bits off, but they were perfectly fine with Valerio, bounced back and has been a winner pretty much every year since. So yeah, really, really interesting to see.
But I think that's one of the things about Monaco Historic that is unique, isn't it? That it is dangerous is probably the wrong word, but it is accident prone more than any other circuit when you've got that variety of experience and car performance all on track at the same time.
Absolutely, and the quick people are committed. You can't. You've got to abide by the laws of physics. You just can't get out of the way of some of these things. And if you turn in, your turning point to a corner is compromised by a foot or a couple of feet, you probably won't make the corner without other major changes. And it's easy to trip over people. There is absolutely no room for error. And I imagine if you're going to compete at Monaco, I never have, but I never will. But I think if you wear blinkers as you sort of drive your car sort of round normally for a few days beforehand, that might give you the idea. Go to Shelsley Walsh instead. Again, nothing much on either side,
No.
but it doesn't stop you from going fast.
No, it just always strikes me as being an accident waiting to happen for a lot of people in all classes of that. The more modern Formula One cars, those cars from the late 70s, they are still incredibly quick around Monaco.
Absolutely right, they are. Yeah, absolutely. And if you unstick one, you're probably going to go into the barrier.
Yes.
Nigel Mansell went into the barriers and sort of blamed the white lines, didn't he, in the road?
Yeah, because those white lines weren't there for anybody else in that race.
Absolutely not.
No.
So that's Formula 3, the modern era, and it's close to my heart because I was one of the guys who started that category back in '86. And all these years later, to see it sort of flying high with an FIA flag nailed to it can't be too bad, really.
Well done.
That's cool. One of the other guys involved in that from the start was Roy Topp, who was Jackie Stewart's Formula One chief mechanic at Tyrrell, and Tony Broster as well, former Monoposto champion, who's not so well at the moment. So hopefully you're on the mend, Tony. FIA Masters Historic Sports Car Championship. Again, you see little roller skates against Lola T70s, which is always fantastic. Little 2-litre cars of the early part of the 70s, the Chevron B19s, the Lola T210s and 212s,
Don't stop it.
Paul's drooling. And they're up against the T70 Lolas, which are wonderful trucks with 5-litre Chevrolet V8 engines in the back of them. You sometimes see the earlier Mark IIIs as well with 5.7s in, which are incredible. And some great GT cars come out as well. Ferrari Daytona, 365 GTB4 Competizione. We see also Porsche Carrera RSRs, Chevron B8s aplenty, which always gets my vote, so that's cool. The early category won by a couple of abnormally brave guys, Chris Jolly and Steve Farthing, in a Cooper Monaco with a Chevy in the back of it, and that was the
madness.
That was the Niki Chevrolet entry that was used in the States back in the early '60s with Skip Hudson driving it, and it's a really mighty machine. Prepared not that far from us, actually, over by Wren Classics in Shaftesbury in Dorset. Two things to go to Shaftesbury for: Wren Classics or Gold Hill, the two great local establishments. And in the post '65, Jason Wright and Andy Wolfe won it. Andy Wolfe, the former Lister apprentice. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, just after the days of the of those sort of things, of course. But he said to me at the weekend that there's an opportunity potentially for him to actually do some driving in a Lister Jaguar this year, and that will be very interesting. I think that will be fascinating because he's gone from modern cars, Renault Spiders, at the same sort of time as Andy Priaulx was doing it, through to racing in historic Formula One cars, historic sports cars. He was a European Supersports champion in Lola 2212, and his preparation shop is absolutely fantastic. They do a great job for the likes of Michael Gans and Jason Wright.
And isn't it interesting that in historic motorsport, we have quite a lot of people who are very, very good car preparers, but also good peddlers as well.
What they've always done is the really serious guys, and I'm talking about the likes of Simon Hadfield, Martin Stretton, Martin O'Connell, who's they've won races at Monaco. They've wherever they go, they're going to be the class of the field. The nature of their business is testing and developing cars, and often if it's a customer car, the customer's away doing a daily job, earning the crust to pay for it all, and of course the preparer gets in and has a go and drives around, and soon the innate ability of the really clever preparer who can engineer as well takes away a lot of the guesswork, doesn't it? You know
Sure.
that you've done X time in a race car, round Donington or Silverstone or wherever it may be, and then when your customer gets in and is 4 seconds slower and complains about this and that, so actually you need to go a bit quicker before you know how the car's going to work.
And then, of course, you get into the next stage of that relationship, which is about the driver coaching, and
Yes.
that you're perhaps just turning into the apex a bit too early there, and those kind of
Very
things.
much so.
So it's a mentoring in every sense.
But
isn't
what
it?
is quite interesting, of course, and we've got these wonderful on-board boxes, the Race Logic V box being the absolute sort of standard setter, if you like, that Julian Thomas has developed, and he started out in the VW Fun Cup. He's now a very, very serious and very, very capable historic racer. That's fascinating. But the danger is that sort of kit can also confuse people who don't drive very often. I knew a guy who had a historic Formula One car, and heard a great story when he was thrashing around Silverstone, burning however many pounds it was per lap to keep the DFV sort of running sweetly and everything, and couldn't get near his best. He could do certain corners better than others, and eventually the preparer just said, chap, I think you might be kind of giving yourself too much to think about right now. At lunchtime we're going to change the car, and what I want you to do is go out in it and just drive it as hard as you can this afternoon and see what happens. And the change to the car was they removed the data logger, so they
Right.
couldn't see the little line that said you're up, you're down, whatever. Concentration on looking out of it, operating the throttle, the brake and the steering.
Yeah,
He went a second and a half quicker than ever been before.
a second and a half.
Yeah, but these are drivers who can find a second and a half. Those at the very top who are dealing with tenths or a couple of tenths, something like that, and they are that good. The front runners. I mean, people like Michael Lyons, who races modern cars as well. He never really achieved a great success in modern cars, but he's gone to New Zealand the weekend just gone and blown them all away. At Taupo with the Lola T400, the very last car I raced.
Is it really?
10 years ago.
Wow.
Absolutely unbelievable in their car at Hampton Downs.
Yeah. Well, we have the video of that car going up the hill at Goodwood.
Yeah.
Festival
Yeah.
Speed last year.
Snarling along.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a licence back now, so
Have you?
I'm going to go and do some testing, which will be really, really good. Formula One, just lastly, with the FIA Masters Historic Formula One, big change of foot in that. 7 double-header rounds this year, and it's basically 6 races next year, of which 3, 6 meetings, of which 3 will count for the championship. So the big events, the kind of the Silverstone Classic, Nürburgring Spa, all in pretty close to, order, might focus attention, might get some bigger grids out. But this year we had Matteo Ferrara, the young Italian, who was going to win the championship until in his Ligier he went off on the oil and water, dropped by a blown engine just ahead of him in practice, stacked the car. That was very sad at Zandvoort, but he's a quick lad. I think he'll do some more modern racing. Martin Stretton, the aforementioned, couple of times a Thoroughbred Grand Prix champion in the past with the Tyrrell 012. He was winning in the Lauda class. And then Henry Fletcher, very, very talented guy who's raced modern cars, GTs and radicals and bits and pieces in a March 761. So that really wraps up the all the sort of news and action from
I am desperately envious of your weekend. It sounds like it's been a lot of fun.
It was absolutely fantastic, and what's more, the weather was beautiful. I went for a long walk on Saturday afternoon and found the Passy Cemetery, where Jean-Pierre Wimille, pre-war race twice Le Mans winner, is buried. Fascinating, and a nice sort of little adjunct to my trip.
Sounds great. And I mean, obviously, before you went, we both had a trip to the racing car show at the NEC, and that was an interesting one, wasn't it? Busy and not so much historic stuff there this year.
No, I think a lot of the historic guys are and the businesses are heading towards Race Retro at Stoneleigh, which comes up towards the end of February, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we're going to be there and doing things, I'm sure, in force. That's a much more focused show, of course. This year there was a big thing marking 70 years, not only of Autosport, the show promoters, but also of Formula One. And so there was a lot of nice old cars from the past, sort of old Grand Prix cars and sports racers as well. You know, your Le Mans cars that you love, and it was very interesting. But it's become a much more widespread kind of power themed show. There's a lot of stuff, people who wrap Lamborghinis and stuff in matte or shiny things, which I don't quite understand, but I don't need to.
No, they're probably not aiming at you or me, but
no.
For me, you're exactly right that I think it's trying to be all things to all men, and that for me, I'll stand and look at a Maserati 250F all day, every day, and I'm very happy to do so.
Yeah.
But then when you've got the 4-wheel drive Lamborghini in candy apple green.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah. Well, no. Did you go to the live action arena to see? Because when we were at Thruxton with Mike Wiles recently, we saw the Mission Motorsport guys, didn't we?
I ran out of time, unfortunately.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I rushed off medical and get my license back. That suddenly became very important to me during the day.
the best of excuses.
But no, it was good. There's some wonderful cars there, and always nice to catch up with a lot of people you don't tend to see other than the hurly-burly of a racing paddock. So
we caught up with John Saltonstall, who has written a fabulous book about Niki Lauda, and it's a reference work, and that it's about every race that Niki Lauda ever drove.
I rather like that fabulous, you know it again, Sterling Moss book, All My Races.
Yes.
So John, Lauda, competition history, obviously very, very famous driver, triple world champion, but obviously a lot more racing history than most people will think of.
Indeed, and his career was far more eclectic in a much wider mix of cars than most people would remember. He's kind of known as the guy who drove for Ferrari and McLaren and came back virtually from the dead to win a championship. But his career spans everything from hill climbs to airfield races, a bit of sports cars. He was a very good touring car driver. A lot of people don't know that he holds the touring car record for the Nordschleife. So far more than just an F1 driver.
Now, obviously, the later exploits, as you say, with Ferrari and then later on with McLaren, obviously well known. There was quite a bit of digging, I suspect, to find out some of the earlier stories and the results.
Yeah, particularly when, if you read his own autobiographies, there's about 14 or 15 races that he competed in that he doesn't even mention that he did. As with any historical research project, you've got to kind of get back to original source material and reports or contemporary magazines, news sheets that were done at the time, entry lists, to get the full picture. To write it as a competition history, as you suggest, it's easy to find the 1975 Monaco Grand Prix, to find the 1968. to find the 1968 Bad Malacan hill climb is slightly more problematical. So you need that kind of original source material to be able to do it.
And I suspect some of that source material probably wasn't in English.
Probably the majority of the stuff from his early career wasn't in English. A lot of it was in German, but also there was a fair amount that went on because he raced across Europe. He raced in Eastern Europe, he raced in France, and quite extensively in his early career in Scandinavia. Yeah, there was a lot of translation involved, a lot of online translation engines to get me through some of that process.
But obviously quite a discovery process. There must have been some moments when you always had a eureka moment, suddenly discovering that missing race or that last piece of information on something.
Absolutely. The Autosport Nostalgia Forum was a great catalyst for finding some of this stuff, because there are people who were on that forum who would say, did you know about this, or were you aware of that? That was particularly the case with his first single-seater race, which actually took place in Finland, and he doesn't mention himself in any of his own books. Lovely story in its own right, because he had been badgering Kurt Bergman, who was the boss of the Cayman Formula V team, and his uncle had also been badgering Kurt Bergman to give him a tryout. He wasn't. He hadn't been successful in getting anything locally with him, but Bergman eventually said to him, well, the transporter driver's on holiday. If you can drive the transporter up to Kemala in Finland and bring it back in one piece, you can have a go. So he did exactly that. Finished fourth in his first single-seater race. And through a contact in Finland, I was able to get a contemporary report from a long-vanished Finnish publication. And very fortuitously, through a chap who was actually a school friend of his, who had accompanied him on the trip, a photograph of him in the car, in the paddock, going out for his first ever practice session in a single-seater. So, it's the nuggets like that were the eureka moments, as you say. They were the things that were enthusing and inspiring.
And I think, as you say, they are the nugget moments, because later on in the career, your Formula One driver, everyone takes pictures of, everyone records every moment. But in those lower Formula, no one knows who the people who are really going to go through and be the big names, and the ones who are still going to be world famous, if you like, 20 years later.
The hill climbing stuff was easier in that respect, because he made an impact straight away. He was driving a competitive car that was well prepared. Second in his first race, won the next four. So he'd made a local impact quite quickly, and local publications were following him. But as soon as he went into Formula V, and his performances were probably a little less noticed, and certainly his early Formula 3 career, which was a disaster, very few people took him seriously or took notice of him.
Okay, now obviously, this is not the work of a moment to actually put together a book like this. How long have you actually been working on? How long did it take to get the data? Because there must come a point when suddenly you think, okay, now I've got enough to justify the project.
9 years is the answer in terms of how long I've been working on it. It had been a sort of labour of love of trying to gather the information. It started because I set out to write the book that I wanted to read, because it didn't exist. And the further I got into it, it became about doing as good a job as I could possibly do, and doing the best job I could possibly do. And the more that I uncovered, and the more things I became aware of that I didn't know about, it then became a more forensic exercise. We were just about complete, and 98% there when he died, and there then became a lot of work required in a very short space of time to get it into a state that it could be published.
That's right, yes. Did you ever get to meet Niki Lauda?
Only in the sense of about sort of 6 feet away at the British Grand Prix in 1982, when I asked him for his autograph, and he said not now, and walked away. And so
okay, strangely in character. Yeah,
totally in character. In fact, a number of people have said to me, what would he think about the book? And I know exactly what he would think about the book. He would have probably said, why are you bothering with all this old whatever?
Exactly, yeah. If anyone could be pragmatic, he would be the Olympic champion of pragmatism, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
That's right. So, firstly, why Niki Lauda? Of all the people you could have picked?
Of all the people I could have. From my childhood, he was, I suppose, my hero. I first became aware of him at the end of 1973, when I became aware that he'd been doing things with BRM that the car shouldn't have been doing. The only reason for being aware at all of that was I had an uncle who was the manager of a local WH Smith's wholesale distribution centre, and he gave me what I'll call damaged copies of Autosport. A damaged copy being one that's lost its cover. So basically, he used to take the covers off and give them to me. So I'd become.
Can I just say I like him already?
I thought he was a fantastic guy. I'd been reading Autosport and become aware of this guy. He then moved to Ferrari, and I opened a copy of Autosport early in 1974, and there was they used to do the lovely colour centre spreads, and there was a centre spread of the Ferrari 312B3, and I just thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And we got this guy, Niki Lauda, driving it, and that was it. I was hooked ever since, really.
Now, obviously, Niki Lauda, his competition history from Aeropress is out there, published and ready for people to buy right now. So you're now going to devote another 9 years to somebody else?
My wife may have something to say about that. There are certainly other things that I have in mind, and there are other things that I have, but it would need to be something that moved me in a similar way.
Okay, fantastic. John Saltershaw, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What else has floated your boat this week?
Well, nothing stands still at this time of year, does it? We've got news stories breaking all around us. One today was really interesting, came from the Equipe Classic Racing crew, John Pearson and the guys up there. And they've launched a new series, which will be interesting. The 50s series for production of sports racing cars. And that's going to be for series production cars up to 3.6 litres, so clearly excludes some of the Jaguar-powered cars, but that's going to bring a really wide variety of cars to the table, or to the tracks preferably. And we're going to see also some sports races as well. They say up to 2 litres. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but I'd rather like to see a shorter time scale on those cars, maybe up to 1500cc, which would allow us to have a lot of the cars that are currently sitting stationary, idle in collections or for sale. We do see Lola Mark 1s, Lotus 11s, that sort of stuff, some of the Elva Mark 5s, that sort of kit as well. But Cooper Bobtails and things, which are smaller engines by and large, there's a few of those around, and actually would make great little cars to come back to the track with.
Do you think there is a demand for it?
I think there must be. They've researched very well,
Yeah.
And John and Rob Cullen, the principals of that group, have done a fantastic job in recent seasons. They like to put on longer races, full grids, sometimes a couple of tranches of cars, an A and a B, and lots of MGBs in their principal focus, some TVR Grand Tourers, and but this earlier set clearly has been targeted cars that are sitting still, or people have come up to them and said, I've got an earlier one. There's no point me running, although I can. I'd rather like something to race against cars of a similar era.
They've been a huge success with what they've done, and all credit to them. It just seems that with the huge preponderance of different series and races that we have now in historic racing, I wish them all the luck in the world, but maybe do we need another series?
Well, it's an interesting marketplace, isn't it? And it's a fickle marketplace too. And people move left, right and centre, and not everyone wants to travel long distances to go racing, and opportunities to race these cars exist elsewhere. But, if you're part of this kind of ageing demographic of licence holders, then perhaps you'd prefer to go to Snetterton or Alton Park or something like that and race your car and do 2 or 3 a year. You've got the opportunity of going to Spa and do the classic relays and things with the Keep GTS, etc. So it's a kind of it's a good option, I would think, and they put on great events.
So all credit to them for that. What else has been happening?
The other one's a very interesting thing. It broke this morning. The Yorkshire Festival of Motoring, and it's based up around the kind of Huddersfield area, and there's going to be a fascinating hill climb at the centre of this, and it's called the Wolfstones Hill Climb. It's for cars, I think mainly of the sort of 60s and 70s, sort of two-seaters and tin tops in the competition section of it. But it's a closed road event, and I think it's going to be just fascinating. I'd like to be able to dig out the actual information on it because it's, I think, something that people will enjoy. It's going to be the last weekend in September. It's going to be the last weekend in June, and it's something which is in the heartland of the old sort of hill climbing sort of areas. I mean, Yorkshire's famous for Harewood Hill Climb. This is going to be, I think, superb. There'll be later cars demonstrated, and I'm sure I believe there's going to be sort of Can-Am McLarens and things going to play on a quite a demanding course. They've just got through all the MSA UK venue regulations they need to do. And it's the brainchild of Michael Macklin, and Michael and his brother David were involved a lot in the past. One of them rallied a Ford GT40, would you believe? And the other circuit raced a Skoda, which was
Isn't
actually
that the wrong way round?
well, you'd have thought, but the Skoda was a Lola T492
right,
with a plastic Skoda body,
Right.
and so that was interesting. But more details of that will emerge, and it's in the area where Last of the Summer Wine was filmed. Absolutely beautiful area of Yorkshire with rolling countryside and some very demanding roads. And I wish them all the best with it. I fear that it's going to be difficult for some of us who are committed to going to Historic Sports Car Club Pembrey in the west of Wales that weekend. I'd love to be there as well, but as I said before, even as a Gemini, you can't be in two places at once.
No, you can't. And I suppose the elephant in the room is the Cholmondeley pageant of power that clearly was trying to be the same kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Cholmondeley ran a few years and then that was wound down. Johnny Dumfries had that one on Butte, didn't he?
Yeah.
And of course, week before last, we had the news that Chateau Impney, which for 5 years had been growing, was being discontinued. So I think that was very sad. It's a sad loss because in the Midlands it really is that triangle between Shelsley Walsh, Prescott and Lowton Park. There is an enormous following for hill climbing, and you don't have to travel very far to get to your favoured climb, or you can do all three. That's why the Midland Championship always goes so well on the contemporary hill climb scene.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's happened last week, very, very sadly, the sport of hill climbing lost Joy Rainey, who was a wonderful competitor. Joy, Australian, but based over here for most of her life, was a remarkable character. She and her father, Murray, who was an intuitive engineer back in the days in Australia with sort of doing stuff with Repco and people like that. He was a 500cc Formula 3 racer. Then he had a supercharged 500, and both of his Coopers still exist. And his engineering prowess was absolutely staggering. Both Murray and Joy were of restricted stature through congenital issues, and to see them both campaigning a pre-war Alfa Romeo, which Murray had built, Jaguar E-Type, and then in later times, the Moraine Clubman's car type thing, and a Pilbeam were just staggering. And when Murray rang me in his very laid-back Australian way, they were from Geelong, outside Melbourne. It was in Geelong while on a winter trip that Joy sadly died. He kind of said, mate, he said, what we're doing with this thing is we've stuck an FVC engine in it, and we've got, in addition to the SodaStream siphon air capsule, which fires the clutch from the gear lever. We've got a little novel solution to sort out the turbo lag. We've got a kerosene fuel afterburner on it, which we fire straight into the exhaust manifold, and it kind of keeps the turbo spinning while Joy's off the gas. And I thought, crikey, this is odd. And he said, I've offered it to the Formula One teams, but they're a bit sceptical, kind of thing. But it was amazing, and Joy was she ran a language school in Guildford, and a very successful businesswoman, very astute, just like her father. And she was quick in the sports car, and then, well, she wanted to go quicker, so the old man put together a Pilbeam single-seater, which was very, very quick. And for kind of a long period of time, she was the dominant force in women's hill climbing, held the records at Shelsley Walsh, which lasted 22 years, I think, survived 22 years, which is amazing. And you forget how long ago it was when they were doing it as a kind of contemporary sport. Prescott hill climb course, Lowton Park hill climb course, I think Gerston Down as well. Absolutely top of the game. And everybody was just filled with admiration for them doing that. But at the other end of the spectrum, they were into long distance events as well. And Joy did she drove a Morris 1000 from London to Sydney with her late partner Trevor Hulks. And not content with that, and these last two things were staggering expeditions with Mark Riley. She drove a 1904 Oldsmobile Curved Dash, a veteran car, across the States and across the centre of Australia. A single-cylinder car for a couple of thousand miles.
Those are the sort of projects that you and I might come up with after several pints in the pub, and the following morning.
And then when we woke up in the morning, we thought, that's not quite such a good idea, is it?
But to see it through, brilliant,
just extraordinary.
Yeah.
And to cap it all, having stopped doing the language school, she decided to open a shop selling Australian artefacts in Broadway, that beautiful little village in the Cotswolds. So, if you were desperate to go and buy yourself a boomerang, then Joy's little emporium in Broadway, opposite the Lig and Arms, was the place of choice. These days, of course, it would retreat to the internet, wouldn't it? You'd keep a little stock of boomerangs in your garage. You probably do, Paul.
Well, I do. I've actually got a garage full of boomerangs because nobody wants them.
But Joy Rainey, then, she was born in the early 40s and died last week, and had a massive following among the hill climb fraternity, and we're very, very sorry to have lost her, but we're, of course, humbled and privileged by the opportunity we all had to see her and Murray, supported by Mum Norma, at the events, and really being a top girl. Well, that concludes the Marcus Pye podcast at historicracingnews.com, brought to you by whattire.com. Speak to you next time.